something shocking appeared on the Ferrari SF-26 just before the Chinese Grand Prix, and within minutes, engineers across the Formula One paddock were already saying the same thing. This could be almost impossible to copy. Not next race, not next month, maybe not even this season, because Ferrari did not just bring a normal upgrade to Shanghai. They revealed a completely new aerodynamic interaction that changes how the entire car behaves. And the timing of this reveal could not be more dramatic. The 2026 season had only just begun in Australia, where teams were still trying to understand the true pace of the new generation of cars. Some looked fast for one lap, others struggled with tire degradation, and many teams were still hiding their real development direction. But then Ferrari arrived in China, and suddenly the SF-26 looked different. Not in an obvious way. No giant new wing, no radical bodywork. Instead, small aerodynamic changes appeared in most sensitive areas of the car. The floor edges, the cooling outlets, the airflow structures guiding air toward the rear of the machine. Individually, these details look minor, but when rival engineers began connecting them together, the conclusion spreading through the paddock was startling. Ferrari might have unlocked an aerodynamic concept that controls airflow in a way other teams cannot easily replicate. And on a circuit like Shanghai, that advantage becomes incredibly dangerous. One of the longest straights in Formula One, a brutal opening corner that destroys front tires, and a track layout that exposes every weakness in aerodynamic stability and traction. If a car has a flaw, China will expose it immediately. But if a team arrives with the right aerodynamic idea, the advantage can be massive. Which raises the question that suddenly has the entire paddock watching Ferrari very closely. Did Ferrari just reveal a concept that could reshape the performance of the SF-26 for the entire season? Because once you understand what these upgrades are really doing underneath the car, you begin to see why some engineers believe the rest of the grid may need months to truly understand it. So before we break down the hidden aerodynamic system Ferrari revealed before the Chinese Grand Prix, the airflow pattern that shocked rival teams, and the reason some engineers believe it could be nearly impossible to copy, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the real story behind Ferrari's SF-26 upgrade might be far bigger than anyone expected. Right after the Australian Grand Prix, Ferrari's engineers returned to Maranello with a very clear realization. The SF-26 was already fast, but the data suggested the car was not yet operating at its full potential. During several stints in Melbourne, the Ferrari showed impressive pace through medium speed corners. The balance looked stable, the drivers were confident on entry, and the car appeared competitive when the tires were inside their optimal window. But once the engineers began studying the long-run telemetry, something subtle appeared in the numbers. The downforce produced by the floor was strong, very strong. Yet the delivery of that downforce was not perfectly consistent through every phase of a lap. And in modern Formula One, that difference matters more than most people realize. Because the majority of a car's aerodynamic grip now comes from the ground effect system underneath the chassis. Air enters the venturi tunnels beneath the floor, accelerates through narrow channels, and expands through the diffuser at the rear. When that airflow remains stable, the car produces enormous grip. But if the airflow becomes unstable, the aerodynamic balance shifts suddenly. Drivers feel that shift instantly. The front of the car becomes slightly lighter. The rear may gain load unexpectedly. And even a small change like that forces the driver to react. A tiny steering correction, a slight lift of the throttle, a fraction of hesitation while accelerating out of the corner. Each of those reactions may cost only a few hundredths of a second. But over the course of an entire race distance, they slowly push the tires outside their ideal operating window. Tire temperatures rise, traction begins to disappear, and the car that looked perfectly balanced early in the stint begins losing performance. That pattern is exactly what Ferrari engineers believed they needed to eliminate, and that is where the upgrades introduced before the Chinese Grand Prix begin to reveal their true purpose. Instead of simply adding more downforce, Ferrari focused on controlling how airflow enters the floor. The edges of the floor were subtly reshaped. Small aerodynamic surfaces guide the air more precisely into the venturi tunnels beneath the car. And additional structures help maintain airflow attachment when the car changes ride height during braking or acceleration. These changes might seem small to the eye, but they dramatically improve the stability of the airflow traveling underneath the chassis, which means the downforce produced by the floor becomes far more predictable. Instead of arriving suddenly, it builds smoothly. And when the aerodynamic load builds smoothly, the driver gains confidence. Corner entry becomes more precise. Mid-corner balance remains stable. And most importantly, traction on corner exit becomes easier to control. But as rival engineers in Shanghai began studying the Ferrari more closely, they realized something even more interesting. Because the floor changes alone did not explain the new airflow patterns they were observing around the rear of the SF-26, which meant Ferrari had adjusted something else at the same time. Something that connects directly with the floor and transforms how the entire rear of the car behaves under acceleration. But the floor changes were only the first piece of Ferrari's puzzle. Because when rival engineers began carefully studying the airflow around the rear of the SF-26 in Shanghai, they noticed something else that made the entire concept far more complex: the cooling airflow. At first, that might sound like a strange place to find performance. Cooling systems are normally designed only to keep the engine and hybrid components within safe temperatures. But in modern Formula One cars, cooling is no longer just about temperature. It is also about aerodynamics. Inside the Ferrari SF-26, the power unit is packaged extremely tightly. The side pods are sculpted aggressively, the engine cover is narrow, and the cooling outlets are positioned with incredible precision along the rear bodywork. When hot air leaves those cooling channels, it does not simply escape behind the car. It interacts with the airflow traveling toward the diffuser and rear wing. That interaction can either disturb the airflow or stabilize it. And this is exactly where Ferrari's concept appears to become incredibly sophisticated. Before the Chinese Grand Prix, the cooling outlets around the engine cover were subtly reshaped. The direction of the hot air leaving the car was adjusted in a way that guides the airflow more smoothly toward the rear aerodynamic surfaces. That might sound like a minor change, but when it works together with the floor modifications, the effect becomes much larger. The floor stabilizes the airflow under the car. The cooling outlets shape the airflow above the diffuser. Together, they create a much more controlled aerodynamic environment around the rear of the machine. And that stability has enormous consequences, because the rear of the car is where traction is created. If the airflow feeding the diffuser remains stable during acceleration, the rear downforce becomes more consistent. And when rear downforce remains consistent, the driver can apply throttle earlier when exiting a corner. Earlier throttle means stronger acceleration. Stronger acceleration means higher speed by the time the car reaches the end of the straight. At a circuit like Shanghai, that advantage becomes incredibly valuable. The Chinese Grand Prix features one of the longest straights in Formula One. Cars accelerate for several seconds before arriving at the heavy braking zone at the end of the straight. If a car gains even a small advantage during the first meters of acceleration, that advantage multiplies along the entire straight. Which is why engineers inside the paddock quickly realized Ferrari's upgrade was not just about cornering grip. It was about controlling how the entire aerodynamic system behaves during the most critical moment of the lap: corner exit. And this is exactly why rival teams began describing the concept as extremely difficult to copy. Because this is not a single aerodynamic part. It is an entire airflow ecosystem. The floor geometry, the cooling airflow, the rear suspension wake, and the aerodynamic structures guiding air toward the diffuser and rear wing. Every one of those elements interacts with the others. If another team tried to copy only the floor changes, the cooling airflow might disturb the balance. If they copied only the cooling outlet shapes, the airflow beneath the car might behave completely differently. To replicate the concept, a rival team would need to redesign how the entire rear aerodynamic system of their car works. And that takes time. Wind tunnel testing, computational simulations, new bodywork, new aerodynamic components. Which means that while other teams try to understand what Ferrari has built, Ferrari continues developing the concept even further. And that leads to a fascinating question that several engineers quietly began asking after the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. What if the upgrades revealed on the SF-26 in Shanghai are only the first step? Because if this aerodynamic philosophy continues evolving throughout the season, the Chinese Grand Prix might eventually be remembered as the moment when Ferrari revealed a design idea that the rest of the grid suddenly had to start chasing.